Okay, let's try and unpack this. We're looking at a group. Well, they started with these really strong revolutionary political ideals,
Yeah.
rooted in Black power, fighting oppression.
Right.
But then they also get deeply involved in drug trafficking, other pretty serious crimes, it feels like.
Yeah.
Well, like two different things crashing together.
It really does. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The the very complex story of the Black Guerrilla Family, the BGF.
Yeah, the BGF.
What's fascinating, I think, right from the get-go, is the amount of information we actually have. It's not just like whispers.
Mm.
We've got historical accounts tracing their beginnings, news reports on specific key moments, and even stuff about their core ideology, their Black Book, as they call it.
Right, the Black Book.
So our mission here really is to try and grasp the essence of this group. What were they really about, and how do those initial aims, stack up against what they actually did over the years?
Exactly. So let's go right back, the start. 1966, San Quentin State Prison, California.
Yep. Key figures. George Jackson, who was a really influential guy, known as the Dragon,
For Dragon, yeah.
along with George Big Jake Lewis and W.L. Nolan.
And that timing, 1966, I mean, that's crucial, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely critical. You're talking the absolute height of the Black Power movement across the U.S.
Right.
There was this huge wave of activism, this real push for racial equality, self-determination. So it kind of makes sense that this environment would feed into the formation of a group like the BGF.
Especially inside prison.
Exactly. Especially given the pressures and, frankly, the injustices of the prison system at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sources really hammer home how central George Jackson was in those early days. He was clearly like the main engine.
It only seems that way.
And it's interesting, too. They've gone by a few names over the years, right? Black Guerrilla Family, Black Vanguard, even JAMA.
That is interesting. These different names, they might, they could tell us something about shifts in focus, maybe identity, or maybe even how they presented themselves at different times.
Could be. Like JAMA, that suggests what? Community, brotherhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which ties into some of their stated goals for sure.
Yeah.
Might indicate shifts in internal structure or evolving aims or even attempts to maybe throw off law enforcement.
Makes sense. Okay, so speaking of aims, how did they actually describe themselves?
Well, they called themselves an ideological African-American Marxist-Leninist revolutionary organization composed of prisoners.
Okay, that's a mouthful, Marxist-Leninist.
It is. And their stated goals were pretty big. Promote Black power, maintain dignity in prison, which is huge in itself, and ultimately overthrow the United States government.
Wow. Okay, overthrowing the government. That's not small. That's a pretty radical aim.
It's certainly ambitious, but again, think about the time, the social political climate. These radical ideas were circulating, especially in marginalized communities.
Sure.
The idea that the whole system was oppressive and needed, well, dismantling. That was a powerful force for a lot of people.
And they had more than just slogans, right? You mentioned the Black Book and something called J-monomics.
Yeah, exactly. It suggests they had a more developed framework than just like random prison gang ideas. The Black Book apparently laid out their ideology, their economic goals, too.
Right. And that seems to be a consistent point. The BGF is often singled out as being one of the most politically oriented prison gangs.
That's what the sources say. So even while they were involved in criminal stuff, their own self-perception, their identity, seems rooted in this broader political fight.
That duality is key, isn't it? Political aims versus criminal actions.
It seems to be the central tension, yeah. How do you square that circle?
Okay, so let's look at those actions, the activities. They've been active, since 66, right up till now?
Pretty much, yeah. Mainly California and Maryland seem to be the hot spots.
And membership? Not huge numbers of core members?
Estimates are maybe 100 to 300 actual members, but then potentially thousands of associates. So a much wider network.
Got it. And the activities list? It's what you might expect, unfortunately. Drug trafficking, burglary, homicide, standard organized crime stuff, really.
It is. And this brings us right back to that central question, doesn't
How
it?
to reconcile it all?
Exactly. Is the crime funding the revolution, ends justifying the means?
Yeah.
Maintaining power inside? Or did the crime just sort of take over at some point? Did the original ideology fade?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It definitely blurs those lines. Political movement, criminal enterprise, maybe both.
It certainly seems complex. And like any group around that long, their relationships with other groups have shifted too.
Right, allies and rivals. Who are they allied with these days, according to the sources?
This is quite a list, actually. Black Disciples, Bloods, Crips, Dead Man Incorporated, El Rookin, KUMI 415, Norteños, Nuestra Familia. That's a pretty wide net.
Wow, yeah. Bloods and Crips in there, too.
The
Interesting.
alliances shift,
Yeah.
based on shared enemies, strategy inside prisons or out on the street, geography, lots of factors.
And historically, who were they linked with back in the day?
That's also really telling. Black Liberation Army, Symbionese Liberation Army, Weather Underground.
Okay, so that definitely puts them firmly in that sort of radical left-wing milieu of the, late 60s, 70s?
Absolutely. It roots them right there.
And the rivals?
Main ones listed are the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, and the Texas Syndicate.
So clear racial lines there, mostly.
Seems like it. Especially within prisons, those racial dynamics are often incredibly stark. The BGF's ideology is explicitly about the black experience, so conflict with white supremacist groups feels almost, inevitable in that environment.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, the sources also point to some specific key events that maybe give us a clearer picture. There's one really disturbing one from 1979.
The attempted murder of Faye Stender.
Right. She'd been a lawyer for George Jackson for the BGF, and she was attacked by a member, Edward Glenn Brooks, who'd just been paroled.
Yeah, that's a really dark and revealing story. The sources say Brooks actually forced her to confess to, betraying Jackson and the movement before he shot her.
God, that's brutal. And she was left paralyzed.
Paralyzed, yeah.
Yeah.
And tragically, she later took her own life after testifying against him. It just shows this intense internal pressure, this sense of betrayal that could exist within the group, and the brutality of enforcing it.
Just awful. Brooks got, 17 years for that?
Something like that, yeah, for attempted murder.
Then jump forward to 1989, another huge event, the murder of Huey P. Newton.
Co-founder of the Black Panther Party, killed by a BGF member, Tyrone Robinson.
Right. What was the story there? Why would a BGF member kill Huey Newton?
Well, it seems the relationship between the BGF and the Panthers, or at least Newton, had really soured.
How so?
Sources suggest a lot of former Panthers ended up in prison, joined the BGF, and felt basically abandoned by Newton and the party leadership outside.
Huh.
Plus, there were allegations floating around about Newton's own issues, struggles with addiction, and even claims he was shaking down BGF drug dealers for money.
Wow. So real bad blood had developed.
Seems like it. Disillusionment, internal conflict, maybe resentment. Robinson was convicted, got 32 years for the murder.
It's just a really stark reminder, isn't it? Even within movements that seem aligned ideologically, you can have these deep, deep divisions that turn violent.
Absolutely. Ideology, perceived betrayal, the sheer harshness of prison life, it can all just fracture things completely.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Fast forward quite a bit now to 2015, Baltimore, the unrest after Freddie Gray's death.
Right. And initially there was this big story, wasn't there? Baltimore police claimed the BGF, the Bloods, and the Crips were, quote, teaming up to target police officers.
Yeah, I remember that. Caused a huge stir, lots of fear.
But then something interesting happened. Leaders from the Bloods and Crips actually came out publicly and denied it, flat out. Yeah, they put out a video statement calling for calm, peaceful protest. And even more surprising, there were reports of them actually working with police and clergy to help enforce the curfew.
Wow, okay. That's not the narrative you usually hear.
Not at all. And it gets even more complicated. There were accounts of gang members actively trying to stop a riot at a shopping mall.
Trying to stop a riot?
Yeah, and apparently protecting black-owned businesses, kids, even reporters on the scene.
Okay.
But, and this is a significant but, the sources also claim these same members directed rioters towards businesses owned by Chinese and Arab people.
Oh, okay, so that adds a whole other layer. That's deeply troubling.
It is. It paints this incredibly complex picture, doesn't it? It really challenges any simple gangs or just criminals view.
For sure.
Their actions suggest something much more intricate, maybe social dynamics, shifting allegiances depending on the exact situation, and that alleged targeting of specific ethnic businesses, that raises some really tough questions about, other tensions bubbling under the surface.
It really does. It's far from straightforward. Okay, finally, let's quickly touch on symbols. What imagery is associated with the BGF?
Classic stuff, really. Crossed sabers, machetes, rifles, shotguns, often with the letters BGF or the numbers 276.
276, what's that?
Second letter of the alphabet, B.
Okay.
Seventh, G. Sixth, F. Just a numerical code.
Ah, got it. Okay.
And probably the most famous symbol is the black dragon.
Which links back to George Jackson, the dragon.
Exactly. It's a direct reference. These symbols, they're powerful identity markers, right?
Yeah,
Loyalty, the revolutionary image, maybe intimidation too, inside prison and out.
makes sense. There's also a mention of Hugo Pinel, Latin Kings. Is that connected?
It's mentioned as a related reference. Hugo Pinel was a BGF member involved in an escape attempt with Jackson. The Latin Kings connection maybe hints at crossover or shared history between some groups. It's not fully fleshed out, but it's noted.
Okay. So, wrapping this deep dive up, what are the main things we've pulled from these sources about the Black Guerrilla family?
Well, we've definitely seen a group born from that intense Black Power era.
Right, with a really radical ideology aiming to tackle systemic oppression.
Exactly. But at the same time, deep, undeniable involvement in serious criminal activities.
And these complex, shifting relationships, allies, rivals, sometimes violent internal conflicts.
Yeah, and then those really surprising kind of contradictory actions during the Baltimore unrest, it adds a whole different dimension.
It really does. It feels like there's this fundamental tension, like you said earlier, right at the core of the BGF.
Definitely. This image, they project political revolutionaries versus the reality of their actions, which often look like, well, organized crime.
Ugh.
But Baltimore, that throws a curveball, suggesting maybe their motivations aren't always fixed. Maybe they're more fluid, more context-driven than we think.
So it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? When you put the BGF's political talk right next to their criminal record, what does that actually tell us? Maybe about the messy reality of power, ideology within communities facing huge disadvantages, especially within the prison system itself.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the different ways people try to fight back or gain control, and the strange compromises or contradictions that pop up when they do. It's certainly not a simple picture.